I teach a course called Exploring the Human Place in Nature, and some of my students are here. And one of my students just turned in a free write, just off the top of her head, stream of consciousness, after reading a piece on natural law and the idea of whether non-human creatures have rights. And just picking a couple of lines here, and this is from Rose Greenberg. She says, so actually, humans and corporations shouldn't have all the rights we do, all the freedoms. We should be more restricted with nature's laws. The Enlightenment idea that humans and nature are separate is so wrong. We were created within nature and we live among it, whether we knew it or not. And she goes on to make some really good points there. In some places along the line, we got the notion that human beings can have rights, and that giant salamanders and bees and earthworms and really can't have rights. Natalie, do you want to start with that? And I imagine Gary will have something to say too, as well as others, about the whole notion of natural rights versus legal rights.
How crazy it is that we even sell water. It's like the liquid of the earth, and we're made of it. And it's like the flesh and body of the earth we're selling, and we're claiming that we own it. And it's like, well, you can't own me. Like, you can't own me. At one point, we thought we did, and we enslaved people, you know. And now, with globalization, that's happening in a different way. I don't know if it's even better, but we see that with people. We see that we were wrong, and you actually can't enslave people. And it was really hard for people to envision that when slavery was happening, for plantation owners in the South to envision their lives without that. And I think it's a similar thing happening now, where it's like, well, of course we sell water, you know? But it's like, actually, that's really crazy.
Let me say this. I have what I call a two-world hypothesis. So let me just give it to you very briefly. If you actually are interested in this, you could go into some search engine and type Gary Patton Two Worlds, and probably you'll come up with the blog in which I write about this every day. We live ultimately in a world of nature. The world of nature that Natalie just talked about. That is the world upon which we're ultimately dependent. All life is sustained by that world, and that world is ruled by various laws. And those laws, natural laws, are the laws that ultimately decide what will happen. Physical laws, biological laws, chemical laws, laws that apply in the world of nature. We live, however, not directly in that world of nature. We have moved from the time when we lived in nature immediately, and the Ohlone tradition is hearkening back to that time. We live now in a world that we construct. All you have to do is look out that window and you can see the two worlds. Kresge College and its physical construction, and the world into which it has been placed. We build a world, a human world, not only physically, but in terms of institutions, in terms of what we decide the laws will be. The laws in our world and the laws in the world of nature are different kinds of laws. If you think about the laws in the world of nature, they cannot be broken. They're like the law of gravity. They are absolutely descriptive of what will happen. They are descriptive. In our world, the laws don't describe what will happen. They are our written down statements of what we think ought to happen, and we can change them, and we often do. We act, however, as human beings, as though we could ignore and break the laws of nature and the laws that we've set up. The law that we're going to sell water, or the laws that the university can build on the North Campus, are inevitable and cannot be broken. We need to change that polarity, because ultimately we live in the world of nature. And what we're doing to the world of nature will destroy ultimately the world that we have built, which we call civilization, and upon which we immediately depend for life and sustenance. Let's remember that, and let's change our laws to correspond to what nature demands.
In our language, we say "eme kauko," and it means all my relations. And it's an acknowledgement that everything living is relative to us and that we are relative to it. That's how we have to look at it. And so, you know, we call it, a Native American philosophy, but you have to remember, going back to a certain time in this world, that it was a basic human philosophy of living at one with Mother Earth and the nature around you. It was a basic human philosophy, and it's there in a lot of us. And it's not just Native Americans or certain indigenous people and tribes. No, it's in us. Whether we live in the city, whether we live in a neighborhood or a town, people see it. People see it and they feel it, and he's talking about civilization and this destruction that it's brought upon this earth. We feel it. As human beings, we feel it. Why? Because we are inherently connected to everything around us, whether we acknowledge it or not. And it's really easy for these people to sign off on the development of these things, never setting foot onto this magical place. That it's really easy. We forget that. They sit up in their Capitol Hill and their buildings and with their fancy shoes and covered in concrete, never connecting to the Mother Earth that they set out to destroy.
Rick, I wanted to ask you, what's really behind this urge to keep growing, to keep continuing to push civilization's footprint further and further? Into the realm of nature.
I don't think I made the point before that how the desalination plant is related to the university expansion. Gary alluded to the fact that if there's no water, if there's no permission for water for the university expansion, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. And if there's no additional water supply, it's very unlikely that LAFCO will give permission for the university to expand. That additional water supply right now is desalination. That's what's the plan for it. So your question is, what is behind the impetus for expansion? All of us have lived in a society where growth is the answer. That vision of pinning our hopes on growth is coming to an end, as the speakers have described. Whether it's the water footprint in Santa Cruz, we bumped up against the limits, or whether it's the limits of ecosystems around the earth, we've come to the end of growth. We need to find a solution to making our economy resilient and where there's shared prosperity for all, but not at the expense of the long-term health of the human population, which are immediately the expense of nature, but it's at our expense in the long run.
Continuing on that just a little bit, are there alternative ways to get drinkable water that aren't so energy intensive and that can actually create local jobs without ruining things for future generations?
There's collaboration between water districts, because right now we have water districts that don't collaborate at all. And we have a district that's 100% well water, which is the Soquel Creek Water District. You have Santa Cruz, which is only 4% well water, the rest is surface water. And if those two districts collaborated, they would reduce the impact of drought, and they would reduce the impact of overdraft in the aquifer. So it's just a question of people collaborating with each other. And as you can imagine, there are barriers to that kind of collaboration that happen. Those institutions are not used to doing it.
So, should we just go down the line? Natalie, what would you like to say? What would you like to leave as a sort of the most important idea, or one of the most important ideas that people walk off with?
Maybe can somebody go first?
Okay, sure.
All right. Well, yeah. Well, really, this mic belongs to each and every one of you. One of the things that makes us human is that we have the ability of free will and make choices in our lives to do what we feel in our heart is right. I want them to take home that there is a bigger picture here. There is a bigger picture here. This is just one small piece of it that we as human beings in the community are trying to take care of.
Well, let me just jump on that horse and ride it just a little bit further down the trail, because the kind of freedom that we have as human beings is the freedom to change what we do. There is nothing inevitable about our current systems. There is nothing inevitable about the way we do things now. We can change those things. And there are better ideas out there, and we need to change.
Well, I just want to mention two things that everybody here could do. And one is there is a ballot initiative petition that you can sign, or you can get signatures on the petition from people who are registered to vote in Santa Cruz. And what that will do is put the decision on constructing a desalination plant in the hands of the voters. The second thing is what Gary has already mentioned. On June 6th at 9:30 in the morning at the county building on the 5th floor, the LAFCO meeting. And LAFCO is a very close 4-3 vote to tentatively put a stop to the university growth pending a new water source. That's a very close, you got to believe there's a lot of pressure on those LAFCO members to shift their vote the other direction. But at the last meeting, I got to say, it was because of people like Natalie and Luta and maybe some of you folks who were at that meeting and speaking from their heart. It was one of the most inspiring public hearings that I've ever gone to, and I think it made a difference. Please come. Thanks.
I think it's really about connecting to ourselves and inhabiting ourselves more deeply and offering the gifts that we have inside and just like allowing them to move through us, and that we have so much power when we come together. I really, really feel that so deeply that that we don't even know how much we're capable of. So just continuing to revisit yourself and continuing to revisit the forest, even if it's hard, you know, and continuing to listen. So.
So there were some questions or comments. Let's start here.
I was just wondering, what's the chemical composition in the desalination?
The process is the salt water is drawn in from the ocean, and then it's put in under very high pressure, pushing against membranes, and on the other side of the membrane is fresh water. So it takes a very high amount of pressure. That's what is the electricity demand, is all that pressure, 1,000 pounds per square inch.
Has there been chemical tests in a lot of the different rivers and nearby waters that are over here due to what the fast track development, you know, and the contractors?
The pollution in the San Lorenzo River, which is the primary water source for the city of Santa Cruz, is actually impacted heavily by development. Both the amount of sediment, the amount of earth that has washed down into the tributaries and the river is about 8 times the amount of sediment that would be there if there were no development. So humans are contributing 8 times the amount of sediment into the river, and that's mostly from roads, logging roads, just regular roads, illegal roads, and also development, housing, and so on. There's also pollution runoff. And so, yes, it's a seriously impaired body of water.
Wow.
Did you want to add to that, Gary, or do you think?
No, Rick is absolutely right. And of course, that water is then treated, and it is treated to standards that the state of California says are acceptable, treated with chemicals. Some people don't think that's really good, but that is what happens, and they put out a report every year. They just put it out showing that our water meets the standards of the state.